This is Dr. Goodin. We'll be talking about Chapter 2 and how to do it. We'll be using the student guide I've made, current as of, a few weeks ago. So let's scroll down to Chapter 2. Actually, we'll just do it this way. Chapter 2. Again, all right, here we go. So, I'll be speaking with Jen today. How are you, Jen?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm wonderful. Thank you. So, here we have some tips and so forth, but I'm really writing most of my comments in the body of the text, which I normally don't like to do, but for the point, for the purpose of you understanding what you're supposed to do. And by the way, Jen, since you're on the call, so to speak, you're the one that gets to ask the questions that you need for obvious reasons. So first it asks, so really we have sections to the Chapter 2 DPDM. Let's look at them sort of more succinctly presented. We have this sort of introduction, which sort of is the criteria that tells us, well, you're going to present a summary of the purpose, explain the organization of the whole chapter, and then tell us how you search for stuff. Then talk about your framework and give the history and make sure that you present some basically evidence that you have mastery of that framework and how the framework will work for your study. So the intro is very small. This is, I think I put some page estimates in the study guide, or the student guide, I should say. The framework is more of, this is an elaboration on what you wrote in Chapter 1. You know how you had that short section on your framework? Well, you're definitely elaborating and adding to that. Does that make sense?
So does this include things like maybe other studies that have used your framework, or is it just...
Right. We'll get into it.
Okay.
I'm just sort of trying to give you the pieces. There are 4 pieces of Chapter 2, and 2 of them are really small, the intro and the summary. The intro is a little bigger than the summary. And then, so intro is, let's say, 5 pages for this. Framework, let's say 5 to 10 pages. And then this one's really oddly sort of, it doesn't even have a good header to it. It really involves a lot of these components from up here. This is actually your lit review itself, the main lit review section. This is going to be 30, somewhere between 25 and 50 pages, something like that. 25 to 50 pages. And then your summary is going to be anywhere from 2 to 4, or maybe even less in some situations. It could be 1 page. So there are 4 sections. Really, this is the meat, the main meat of Chapter 2, and then sort of the most substantial part, apart from the literature itself, the research you're reviewing, is the review of the framework. So you've got a review of the framework, a review of the literature, and then these 2 smaller portions, one up front,
Okay.
the intro, and one at the end, the summary. Okay, and so we'll switch back to, notice I'm using my my video presentation voice.
The instructions.
I always
That's
use
okay.
a different voice when I'm doing video presentations. I don't know why. All right, that Dr. Pepper helped. Maybe they'll sponsor this. All right. Begin with a summary of the purpose statement that leads. All right. Purpose statement, first of all. Begin. Well, you need this. That's what it says. And then it needs to lead to this. So you need 2 things.
Okay.
You're not going to cut and paste from chapter 1, but you can cut and paste that one sentence. So it says summarize the purpose statement. One sentence you can cut and paste that from chapter 1, the one that says the purpose of the proposed study or the proposed whatever qualitative case study is. You can use that sentence, but your elaboration and your summary discussion of that purpose should not be a simple cut and paste from chapter 1. Instead, you'll want to use some new words and be pretty concise in this summary, because this is not the main point. The main point is to remind the reader, here's the purpose of the study, and to allow that summary of the purpose statement to lead into, here's the organization of the lit review.
So is that organization almost like a outline without it being in the outline format of just the main headers that you're going to hit upon, or?
Right.
Okay.
So I've used a really dumb example because I was meeting with another student and I just came up with whatever was in my head at the time. Apparently I was hungry. So with regard to the brief explanation, right? You can't really do this yet, but you can get started. You can write down some ideas. So I write later because you won't know this all yet. Then discuss what will be in the chapter. Note that apart from the theoretical framework, you won't really be able to give the organization of the lit review yet because you haven't done it. Because this will be based off the headers that you create when you write the lit review. You haven't written it yet, so you can't put those headers in here yet. If you think you already know your headers, you're doing a lit review wrong, right?
So it's almost like a mirror of the summary that you're going to write at the end.
Almost, yes. Very, very good. So you need to let the literature lead you to the headers instead of you saying, well, I think I should cover these headers, these topics. Let me go search for them. That is the wrong way to do a lit review. Instead, you find literature relevant to your topic of study, and you follow that literature to where there are convergences and divergences, which I will discuss in greater detail. Is that making sense so far?
Yes.
Okay, so after you do the lit review, later on in the future, your future self will come back to this section and list those headers. Like, let's say your study was about pizza. You're going to have a header that says pizza's best qualities, and it talks about that. Pizza's worst qualities. Eating pizza cold. Eating pizza hot. Best places to eat pizza, and other headers that have to do with pizza. That would be a dissertation on pizza, I guess, right? Not my best example ever, but simplicity is sometimes our friend. So include several subheadings specific to the dissertation. Notice it's asking you for this in the introduction, which is silly. I apologize on behalf of whoever made this. It's asking you for this, but there's no way, just as we say here, you don't have this yet, so you can't do these yet. The subheading specific to the dissertation.
So you almost have to do it backwards.
Your future self will come back to this and fill this in. This refers to the headers that you will make later when you have done the lit review. So in addition to headers, you'll have subheadings and possibly sub-subheadings, but probably not. Shouldn't get too detailed there. Maybe stick with 3 levels, 4 levels max. 5 levels is crazy. No need for that. So, are you with me, Jen?
Yes, I'm wondering a little bit about how much you get into everything. Like, how far off do you branch from like your topic when you're doing the lit review?
Right. So you need to think of, you know how your dad like tells you stories, maybe just assume that your dad tells you stories in this situation, right? You know how he tells you stories? My dad tells me stories, right? And so if my dad tells me stories, and then where's the part where he starts telling me about stuff I don't care about? Well, maybe that's most of it, but there is some of it I need to pay attention to, right? Right? Or maybe it's your mom in this situation, or your auntie, or whomever. I don't know. I don't know who that person is because I haven't stalked your life. But so this person, if they are discussing something with you, when do they go off topic? And they start telling you about my dad's like, yeah, and so I saw this person yesterday at Walmart, and he was pushing a shopping cart. It was the strangest thing because, and he gets into details that you do not care about, that are no longer relevant to the conversation. My dad does this all the time these days, and so you want to find that sort of circle to surround your study with that says, well, I'm going to search for articles that are relevant to my study, but there has to be a limit on what is relevant, right?
Right.
Is it one standard deviation, 2, 3? And so when does it get ridiculous versus when is it pertinent? And so you must always sort of think about it, and you can have conversations with me, of course, and think about it and say, okay, is this relevant? And so think about if you were listening to a presentation on this topic, is it something that you would say, why is he talking about that? Sort of like a minute ago, you were like, why is he talking about my dad? I don't, and, when does the conversation start to break apart and not make sense anymore, right? Because you've gotten off topic a little too much. And so you've got to find a way. So think about, as you are the presenter in this case, you have things that you must present, right? And so you have a limited amount of time to explain the most important things that someone in your audience, all the people in your audience, need to know about your study before you start collecting data, analyzing that data, providing the results, interpreting the findings, etc. What do they need to know? Think about that, and think about limited, I think you're a teacher, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes,
as a teacher, you have to limit what you talk about during class. Well, they really need to know this, this, and this, and you limit it to a certain amount of information. You could go into, well, Copernicus was born in such and such city, but who cares? Is that going to help them do well on the tests they need to take to get into college, etc., right? So you need to focus your review and sort of put that circle around the articles that you are reviewing such that you don't get into the extraneous and you keep everything germane. And so you're always sort of evaluating, all right, is this article germane enough or is it too extraneous? And you'll start to realize if a topic is germane enough. But you always need to, you don't want to end up on a rabbit trail and sort of end up writing a whole section about something that really isn't germane to your topic. Does that make sense?
Yes. So my topic is on gender differences in complementary and alternative medicine.
Right.
And the usages and attitudes in that area. So would I talk about like current trends in complementary and alternative medicine, even though it may not mention gender at that point, just so that it's like a broad view, or would that be too off topic, something like that?
Current trends in CAM?
In CAM.
Yeah,
usage.
so of course everybody's study is going to have sort of different caveats of what they consider as germane and what is
Okay.
extraneous. In that case, I would think, yeah, that would be.
That would be relevant because of the
You
usage.
can make a case for the relevance of that,
Okay.
and if just sort of help them, sort of like a case that you're presenting in court, in a court of law. Say, sort of, do you have enough rationale to say, here's why this matters enough for me to present it? Um,
Okay.
and for me to sort of spend your time making you read about this. In your case, current trends in CAM can what does it stand for?
With
Complementary
complementary and alternative medicine.
and alternative medicine. The trends could have something to do with whether or not their people would feel comfortable using them or not, right? So
Right.
it could have a
Okay.
direct effect on the qualitative. You're doing a qualitative study. The
Yes.
qualitative results you
Attitudes
get.
or usage patterns or things like that.
So, but going deep into CBD oil and sort of giving me subsections upon subsections on CBD, for instance,
Right. A
which one
specific cam might not be
that's too
as relevant.
much, right? You
Right.
don't need to. So you need to find sort of like how to fill up that circle of germane content without diving too deep into some sort of um, specific area that doesn't deserve the attention you're giving it.
To fill up those 50 pages without
Yeah, don't do
the-
that. So let's look back up here. At the end of this section, so this one you can do now. At the end of this section, this is in the intro, list the databases accessed and the search engines used. List all the search parameters, including the search terms and their combinations, with more detailed search terms located in an appendix if appropriate. Range of years and types of literature. Now, you can do all this now. You can add to it maybe later because you might have more search terms that you use as you go. So you say something like, to do this search, or to do this literature review, I used search engines such as Google Scholar and North Central University's library Roadrunner search engine. That's what it's called. And whatever else you may have used, right? Give a list of those things. Somebody recently just said, I used the university library, and I said, okay, that's not enough. Did you use
the
anything like
science
psych info?
director.
You know, she gave no details of like any specifics, and I said this to her. You need something like this. I also use databases such as EBSCOhost, PsycInfo, whatever else you may have used. You don't have to list every single one. I will not know if you leave one out. But for the most part, we want this to be reproducible. So providing the details is important. Basically, what you're doing is you're telling the story of your dissertation. So you might say, I searched using words such as pizza, pie, toppings, Italian, Chicago, pepperoni, Italian sausage, pineapple, pan, Brooklyn style, thin crust, and other words. And then I used pizza and pan. You could insert some Boolean phrases that you use to make combinations. Um, if you did, rarely do I see anybody actually use a more detailed search terms located in the appendix, but I guess that could happen. Um, I'm not real worried about it. So if you're my student, you can talk to me before you start making that appendix. Although I found some, so this is dealing with the range of years, which is what's asked for next. It says, although I found, so we're dealing with that. You might use words such as, although I found some seminal articles from the 1950s, and this is just my made up example, I primarily searched from 2015 to present. Now this year is based on me writing this in 2019. So Whatever
Right.
year you're in, subtract 4, because you're probably not going to finish till next year. And that will make your articles within the past 5 years. NCU has asked that 85% of your articles be current to the past 5 years. So you'll say, I primarily searched from 2015 to present in this case. And then you'll say the types of literature. So you'll say, I only searched for research articles that were peer-reviewed, or something like that. You don't have to use it in this order. You don't have to say it this exact way, but I'm giving you an example of the types of things you need to cover.
Need to say, okay.
Right, so next it says devote approximately 30 to 70 pages to this chapter to include citations of at least 50 relevant sources. So I just say keep an eye on this. Think about this and look back at it as you move forward. Have you gotten to 50 unique sources yet? Have you reached 30 pages yet? And sort of try to keep a tab on how many of them are within that 5-year currency range, so that you won't have to worry about that. If you constantly try to keep an eye on remaining current, then you won't be worried, right?
Okay.
If you don't, and you just haphazardly go searching for literature, then you might end up with 50% current, and we're going to have a discussion that sounds something like, well, you need a whole lot more current articles in this lit review, and you need to go find them, right? And so you don't want to be in that situation. Make sense?
So it's better just to get current stuff to begin with.
Yeah, best to just know what is going to be asked of you and to do that the first time, right?
Yes. Do it right the first time.
Yes, something like that.
Always good.
That's what my mom said. So, theoretical or conceptual framework. Remember, this is the first sort of big section, about 10 pages is what I am guessing right now. It says, describe the guiding framework. It can be theoretical. This is normally it depends on who you talk to. For a quantitative study, we often call it theoretical. For a qualitative or mixed method, we often call it conceptual. Other people will disagree with what I just said. However, either way, it's a framework of the study.
Okay.
So describe that. Include the definitions of all the concepts. An explanation. Every time you see a comma, think of that as one item on the to-do list. So I need to do this, describe it, and this is sort of details of doing that. But think of this as number 2 on the to-do list. Include the definitions of all the concepts. Provide an explanation of the relationships among those concepts. And a presentation of all of the assumptions and propositions of the framework. So, say something like, the guiding framework for the study is ultimate pizza philosophy, which I made up, I think. Then discuss the main things that it has to say. First of all, it says, pizza is good. B, it says pizza is round, pizza is cheap, thus pizza is the perfect food. Okay? And so dealing with relationship among the concepts, you might say, with regard to the relationship among the concepts, or you might not be so on the nose about it. 2 things that are really important are that it is round and cheap. This makes it easy to slice and easy to share, such that when finances are low, the budgetary influence mandates the need for a flavorful experience to be easily shared. Right? And so there are some propositions that we're dealing with here based on these key tenets that I made up that are somewhat true. Right? And so we're sort of given an understanding of this, what I made up, the UPP, Ultimate Pizza Philosophy. And you're going to do the same with your framework, just not about pizza. Please. That would be a mistake. Other additional assumptions, you might say, pizza was given to humans in an effort to help them stave off the pressures of modern life, according to the UPP. So basically, you're just giving, here's everything you need to know about this theory, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense or no? Have I lost you?
Yes. No, you didn't lose me. A
okay.
lot of that was covered in the chapter 1, so this is an expansion of that?
It is an expansion of that. And if you don't like something I'm saying and you're scared of like messing up the recording, don't worry about it. I can just edit it out, or people can laugh along with you at me.
I already coughed earlier in the recording. So.
Oh, we're gonna edit. No, we won't. But seriously, just treat this like a meeting because it needs. Right. I mean, I'm not doing very well at that either, but
it's all right.
Are you still getting what you need even though I'm recording?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, because tell me if you're not. I can stop it.
No, it's fine. I understand. Yeah.
I'm just trying to like not. Even if I have to do this every time, having it as a take home for people would be nice, I think. Not that they're, not that they're going to watch this every night. That'd be weird. Okay, then explain the origin and development. Your husband's like, I don't know what he said. All right, explain the origin and development.
Laughing in the background.
So you do get more in detail about the theory. Remember, this is going to be 10 pages about the framework. Explain the origin and development of the framework. Demonstrate detailed knowledge of and familiarity with both the historical and current lit on the framework. And so you might say something like this. The UPP was developed in 1901 by Hans Schiess and his wife Judy. They started out with only Principle A. As the philosophy or theory gained influence, they added B and C in 1915, etc., right? You give the story of its development. Schiess and Schiess you cite in 1915. Through the years, this stuff happened to their theory. They kept developing. Still today, scholars contend that UPP is an excellent food framework. I made up Cohen 2019, while some, Scott 2019, suggests that a more nutritional diet would be better for society, right? And here, notice we're getting into this sort of synthesis sort of language that I want you to start using, especially in the lit review, where we start comparing one opinion to another.
Right. So you don't have a whole paragraph on Cohen and then another one on Scott. You just show that they are, contradicting each other in their.
You're constantly presenting convergence and divergence, or what the kids used to call compare and contrast. Right? That's what they called it when I was in school.
I like convergence and divergence because those are math words, so those are good.
Sweet. Indeed, Scott researched, so we're elaborating on how Scott disagreed. Scott researched plant-based nutritional training by parents in his work at NCU. Basically, you're showing evidence that you know all about this theory. This is your chance to show, look, I know what I'm doing.
Okay.
Demonstrate detailed knowledge of and familiarity with the historical and current lit on the framework. So, what is happening now? Well, people are still using it, so forth. Question?
No.
Okay, I thought I heard something. It was me. Identify existing research studies. So this is straight from the DPDM, and then the arrows are where I talk. Identify existing research studies that used this framework in a similar way. mention alternative frameworks with a justification of why the selected framework was chosen. So this is really two even conceptually different things. First, it wants you to do this.
Right.
And that's completely different from this. So
those actually should be different bullet points almost.
In my opinion, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I would have done that, different bullet points, starting with mention. So let's take a look. Other researchers, in my example, other researchers have used the UPP to suggest that other foods like bacon are the best food ever, says Bacon 2012. Bacon suggested some stuff, right? Similarly, someone else used UPP to study something else that wasn't even food related. Just discuss about 5 to 10 studies that have used your framework, right?
Okay.
And then it asks us to mention alternative frameworks with a justification of why we chose the UPP in this case. Say something like, I could have used the food is fun theory, but it didn't emphasize the hierarchy of some foods over others, which is what I'm trying to do in this study. FIF suggests that all foods are fun, but doesn't emphasize the idea that some foods are tastier and more fun than other foods. Thus, FIF was not as good of a choice for this study as UPP. And you might want to cover more than one alternative theory. Maybe 2 max. One would be sufficient probably.
At least one.
But 1 to 3 is what I'd go for. And say, I could have
used... I don't know how many complementary and alternative medicine frameworks there are out there.
Well, you've got to come up with at least, 1 or 2 others that say, I could have used this, but... And you can't just say, I could have used this, but it has nothing to do with complementary and alternative medicines. So you need to find something that almost could have worked, but here's why it wasn't quite as good.
Something maybe like a gender framework or something, or...
Perhaps. Or something maybe based on a Western medical model for your study.
Okay.
That really does capture a lot of what you want, but it really doesn't have that sort of, maybe that appeal to complementary and sort of the independent sort of thinking, or something like that, where you're trying to get buy-in for non-mainstream
medical
products and practices. So you might say, well, I could have used this, which is a Western medicine model, but it doesn't really give me the insight into why people use these sort of outlying products or something like that. I don't know. You'll have to do that work. It's one of my favorite sayings. You get to do that. Describe how and why the selected framework relates to the present study and how it guided the development of the problem, purpose, and research questions. You have this in Chapter 1. Right?
Right.
If you worked with
Definitely
me,
in Chapter 1.
then you're going to use the UPP was appropriate for developing the problem, which is, the problem is whatever it was, because of, here's why that framework, the UPP in this case, is really the most appropriate for allowing us to understand that problem or to shed light on it, to elucidate it, whatever. We're doing the same for the purpose, and then the same for the research questions. Okay?
Mm-hmm. So that can almost be copied and pasted from Chapter 1?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Okay.
All right, now when we get here, I should probably just say literature review is what we're actually doing. This is the start of the literature review, and a header that says so would be helpful. Here's where you start doing the tedious, hard work. I call it that. This is probably the most besides chapter 1, you know how it was sort of like figuring things out. What are you going to do? And
Right.
there's a lot of sort of slowing down and like which direction do we need to head in before we start moving.
Mm-hmm.
This is we know what direction. It's just there's so much to find in these woods or whatever you want to call it, whatever metaphor you want to use. There's so much to find. What is important? What is germane versus extraneous? So start reading articles. Aim for 5 years ago to present, or even 4 years ago to present. For each one, write some notes to yourself about what the main points were. What was the discussion about? Right? You could create annotated bibliographies for each, but I really want these sort of main idea notes as well. And you can use sort of a digital sort of organization format, or you can use post-it notes on top of piles. It doesn't really matter, but what you want is a way to see how the main points that one article made are similar or different from the main points that other articles made. So let's say we were working with articles that had findings like this. And I'm pretty sure I didn't spell anchovy correctly. Anchovy 2016 wrote an article about toppings being important, right? That's something Anchovy really said. You know, that was one of their main points. The importance of toppings. Anchovy also said 3 or more toppings is a must-have. Of course, I'm making all this up, and these are not always the best examples, but the point is for you to get the idea of what we're doing. A third thing that Anchovy hit on pretty strongly was suggesting pizza with friends is important. All right, what did Bacon say? There was a Bacon study. Bacon did a study in 2017, said that bacon is the best topping, but said that one topping is enough. Bacon said that eating alone is fine. Bacon agreed that toppings are important. Bacon said that pizza is the best food. All right, now Cheese comes along and writes an article. Let's just imagine that you read this article by Cheese. 2019 said that pizza must be round, not square. Said that pizza must be eaten with friends. Said that pizza must be eaten while watching entertainment such as movies. Said that extra cheese was the most important topping, but there must be at least 3 toppings total. Okay. Pineapple suggested, I was going with ABC, and then I couldn't think of a D, so I switched to pineapple because I like pineapple.
You like pineapple pizza?
Yeah, pineapple and Italian sausage. In case anybody wants to send me a pizza in the mail.
Send you a pie? Okay.
That would be probably not healthy. Pineapple suggested that pizza is the best food, that eating with friends is fine as long as there is entertainment. Disagreed that bacon was the most important topping. So we've read what? 1, 2, 3, 4 articles. And we're starting to get an idea of how they overlap or don't. So we might start formulating paragraphs and sections based on areas of convergence and divergence that would begin with the above. First, we're going to note outliers or discrepant cases or discrepant information, really, or discussion. Discussion where one person talked about it and nobody else did. So we note these to ourselves at least, and only include them in a discussion if they are someone or somewhat, I guess. Someone or somewhat. I think I meant to say somewhat noteworthy. In this case, it is probably not important to have a section or even a paragraph on round versus square, unless other articles that we read as we keep reading, because we're going to read more than 4, as we keep reading, if they start talking about round versus square, then we might form a section with a header that says pizzas should be round, maybe. And then we've obviously realized that other people indeed are talking about this, not in the first 4 articles, only one person, but as we kept reading, other people talked about the shape, and so we might have a header on shapes of pizza.
Mm.
Okay, but if
Crust would definitely come into the
apparently I wasn't thinking about crust.
crust. Yeah.
Then our sections and their titles, which are headers, are formed by areas where people disagreed and agreed. Those headers and subheaders, in some cases, look something like this. So we notice that toppings was a big topic. It was probably a header. Subheaders may be the number of toppings and the best toppings, for instance, right? So we could have a header of toppings with subheadings of number of toppings and best toppings.
Okay.
So you really follow where the literature leads you with regard to what you're going to write about.
Okay.
We might say anchovy 2016, and this is an example of writing with synthesis. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting tired. We might say anchovy 2016 said that 3 toppings was crucial, and cheese 2019 agreed. Bacon disagreed that 3 toppings were needed, suggested, all right, that only 1, preferably bacon, topping was needed. Okay, so we're sort of giving this sort of back and forth. Here's how they agreed. Here's where they disagreed. Here's a minor contention, a point of discussion, a point of agreement. Here's whatever. In this paragraph, we've shown convergence and divergence, just a little bit. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, eating with friends or eating with entertainment was also a big topic, or at least a subtopic. We could talk about different thoughts that the authors had from those articles, right? Had on these things and how they agreed and differed. We want to do that, talk about convergence and divergence areas for everything relevant to your topic. Again, within that sort of circle of germane versus extraneous. And I'm glad to help you with, if you ever like write and say, remember, this is what my study's about. What do you think of me doing a section on this? And I'll be like, no. Or I'll say, yes, I think that's a good idea. Or I'll say, let's get on the phone and talk about it. Okay? So thus, you have sections formed with headers that represent what content is in those sections. One thing we haven't discussed is critique. If you notice that Bacon's study was solely based on interviews with his mom, then you might want to point that out. It's a ridiculous idea, but you're going to look for things like that are noteworthy to the potential reader. Not for you to really present your discussion of the research with a bias, but to present it with some mastery of methodology and research, and saying, I think it's noteworthy to point out that he only interviewed his mom. It might help your reader to understand that perhaps they should put less weight on that study, especially comparing that to what Pineapple did with 5,000 participants of all ethnicities, diverse demographics, using random sampling, right? We have, and so you're giving the information to the reader and saying, do what you want with this, but I'm going to point out a key difference here. And that I'll get to that. So critiquing means pointing out sometimes, when appropriate, strengths or weaknesses in the study methodology or other factors that were noticeable. Like, well, I did note that Chick-fil-A sponsored this bacon study, right? Yeah, we can see how that would bias the results. Like if there was an apparent conflict of interest. Anything that might shed light on the results. This is one of my favorite statements that I've written in this paper. That's a weird thing to say. But anything that might shed light on the results beyond how they might naturally appear. Does that make sense?
Insight.
Right. Providing insight that, like, if you just gave them the findings from an article, well, they're just going to read those findings. But if you have something to say
Some
that
commentary.
commentary wise, but not commentary like opinion, commentary like, well, Bacon interviewed his mom, Chick-fil-A sponsored this study, you know, that's stuff that makes you look at the same exact findings in a different way, right? Because you might say, well, that's potentially biased, a biased study, or potentially poor findings because one participant, and the participant was his mom. So there might be participation bias or response bias in that case. Okay?
Hmm.
Making sense?
Yes.
Okay, so you were asked to do these things. And this is in that third section. Critically analyze, note the strengths and weaknesses, and synthesize or integrate the existing research. Rather than reporting on each study independently, describe everything known on the topic by reviewing the entire body of work. Do you feel that if we do what I've stated and described above, that we will accomplish this? Critical analysis and synthesis, right? So what I've described above should accomplish this criteria. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is not a new criteria. What I've described above is to meet this criterion. And then present a balanced, integrative, critical review of the literature, ensuring all points of view are included. Cover all the important issues with a discussion of areas of convergence and divergence. Provide potential explanations for areas of divergence. So do you feel that we would have accomplished that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
It just feels like 30 pages of that is going to require a lot,
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, that's why I sort of built the guide. Because first of all, people don't know how to sound. A lot of people will just start creating these annotated bibliographies and just list like 50 of them in sort of serial order. There's one after another, annotated bibliographies. Well, there was this one study that did this, and another study that did this, and so forth. And there's really no master presentation.
Right.
So
this almost needs like a storyboard or some sort of like chart to show how they all fit together.
right, and you're the one presenting it in a way that will. I'm not saying you're going to make it the most entertaining thing ever, but you are going to present it in a scholarly, professional way that that could hold the attention of an audience, and that definitely presents all the pertinent information in an organized fashion, so that they don't have to get into the readers don't have to get into the gritty details because you did your dissertation on this, which means you got into the details and you are now presenting what you found. It's
I'm
almost
recording.
it's almost as if the lit review is a research project in and of itself, and you are presenting the results of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, summaries just briefly restate the key points discussed in the chapter, review the headings and or table of contents to ensure all points are covered, highlight areas of convergence as well. And this is just big order, higher order stuff. Convergence and divergence, as well as gaps in the literature, and hopefully a gap in the literature that support the need for the study. So something like, well, what I'm proposing to do in my study has not been thoroughly covered by the literature. That would be a really good point to make, right?
So there
If it
shouldn't be
has,
that
then
much literature on what I'm exactly doing. It should be more about the supporting ideas, right?
explain.
So if there's supposed to be a gap in the literature that support my need for the study, then the literature review that I'm doing, you know, it shouldn't be exactly what my study is going to be on, because then my study wouldn't be necessary, right? So this is things that would lead into or support the study or are kind of directly around the study. Is that
Right. So you know how in chapter one you did all that work to sort of justify that you had a problem that
right?
needed to be researched
Yes,
because it hadn't been researched yet?
right.
But people in their sections discussion of implications for future research, they were saying that you need to do this, or someone
Yeah,
does.
right.
They weren't saying your name specifically, unfortunately. But
It would have
okay,
been easier to search if they did say my name, you know.
so you're basically going to create an even larger conversation, including maybe what you had right there in your chapter one problem statement, that sort of discusses that and says, you might even say, as aforementioned in chapter one, um, problem statement, you know, there there are gaps in the literature with regard to gender um, differences or inequalities or whatever you want to say, um, with regard to complementary and alternative medicine usage and attitudes. And so by having the full literature review, you're hopefully able to even shine a brighter light um, on that gap in the literature, saying, "Look at all this research now." In your chapter one, it was just a short piece of like, here's 5 citations that say this needs to be studied. But now you're going to have this big body of literature that you've reviewed, and you're presenting it, and you're going to say, you're going to note how it it really does point out that there's and of course not every paragraph is going to say, and by the way, they didn't study gender, but there are going to be points like that, and you're going to reiterate that need to study what you're studying. You're going to reiterate that before proceeding into chapter 3, and then chapter 4, of course. Um, so you kind of mentioned that it's really big and really long, and it feels that way. But you're gonna you're gonna get good at it, um, and you're gonna be able to tackle it pretty quickly. Um, you can use some of these formulaic sentences like, while so and so stipulated that, while so and so said this, Bob said this other thing. Um, this third person disagreed, and you're gonna go on like that, and just sort of being sort of the commentator, the master presenter of this big conversation. Um, does it take a while? Yes, but this is really where you become, because really the rest of it is just research. The rest of your dissertation, I hope I'm not stepping on my toes here, but saying the rest of your dissertation is just research. This is really where you are gaining, at least in terms of content, you are gaining expertise. You are truly learning. You're reading, you're digging into the articles, and you're gaining mastery
An
of
expert on my own topic.
of your topic.
Mm.
Right. And then you just present that, and I made that sound really easy, but it's not so hard, and this is why we encourage you to choose something you're passionate about, because if you're writing about something that you're not real
But I have to
into,
read.
you're
50 articles.
you're gonna burn out, right? So anyway, of course, I didn't cover everything, but do you feel like you understand how to do sort of a
It's
paragraphs
much more
that
clear how to do the synthesis portion, like how you want me to approach that particular aspect of it.
you said that is or is not clear?
It is clear, much
Okay.
more clear
And critique?
how to go about the synthesis portion by. I liked your analogy with the pizza or
Yeah.
example with the
Yeah.
pizza. Yeah.
Well, good. With critique, you don't need to be critiquing every single article. It's just when you notice something a little interesting about an article,
If something stands out,
right? That's
like
when
they
you
used a
might,
really small sample or something, or
right? Or like when two articles, are studying the exact same thing but have different findings. It's sort of like uh, we've got the 2020 presidential election coming up, and we have polls that disagree with each other. If in as we'd like to know why or what was done differently, and so in the same way or in a similar fashion, we'd like to know if you can give us some insight as to why these articles may have had different findings when they were studying the exact same thing. Then please tell us, right? And you're not, again, you always want to avoid any sign of bias in your research. That's not the goal. The goal is not to prove anything. The goal is to present the research and to give some sort of expert assessment if something is sort of lacking. So the intro is pretty short. I would probably say, I think I already said 5 pages. It can be 3 to 5. Theoretical framework. This section can be about, I'd say 8 to 15 pages, maybe 8 to 13. I'm just guessing. I'm making up numbers. Okay, you with me?
can we make up smaller numbers?
Nope. No, because I want you to aim for bigger. Um, can we aim for smaller numbers? If you're making them up, can you just make up smaller numbers? And these are guesses. This one actually said in the directions, I think, at the very top in the intro. Notice that for the lit review section, the third section, some of the guidance for it is located in the first section.
Right. It says 30 to 70 on this document. The one I have, I think, says 40 to 80.
Right. I think this one's newer.
Okay.
This is the 2019.
Oh, good.
And so, by the way, if you're ever viewing this video, you in the future, people, definitely make sure that this aligns with the DPDM or whatever it's called that you're using, and is up to date and so forth. But hopefully this gives you an idea of synthesis and critique, which are probably the two main concepts I'm trying to help with. So intro, and then we sort of say, here's the lens by which we're going to understand our study, the framework. And then here's the body of literature that we should know about in order to do our study, which points out, among other things, the gap in literature that we're going to help to fill by doing this study, right? And then a summary, which is pretty short and sweet. Okay, any questions?
Nope, that looks great.